Get off the bench, old man. Silence. I'm talking to you. You deaf too? Still nothing. Your daddy's in jail. You got nobody. And your coach can't even see straight. A laugh then. You're nothing. Same as him. 16,000 people were watching live. Nobody moved. Then a 10-year-old hit the ground. Blood on concrete. Small hands. Still curled into fists. Still in guard position. Still protecting what mattered. The old man took off his glasses, folded them, set them on the bench. And for the first time in 46 years, he looked up. The garage was dark. Eldon didn't bother with the light. He hadn't needed light in here for 30 years, and he hadn't needed to come back here either. Until now, he knew where everything was. The bag hanging from the center beam, the jump rope coiled on the left shelf, the roll of hand wrap tucked between two paint cans he'd bought in 2019 to touch up the porch and never open. Ruth would have said something about those paint cans by now. She would have said it nice, which somehow made it worse than if she'd just said it plain. He found the wrap in the dark, sat down on the wooden stool that hadn't moved from this spot since 1991, and he started. 2 loops around the wrist, 3 across the knuckles. Pulled tight between each finger, his hands remembered, even after 30 years, even at 2 in the morning in a dark garage in October. Muscle Mabzunisbini does negotiate with Tacha. It just shows. He sat there when he was done, both hands wrapped. The bag hanging in front of him, just a shape in the dark. He didn't hit it. Not yet. He just looked at it, or looked toward it. His right had been gone since 1984. His left picked up the outline against the darkness. He sat for a long time, then he went back inside. Set the alarm for 6, lay down on top of the covers, still dressed. Sleep. Eldon Webb had lived on the same street for 41 years. Same house. Same porch. Same 3 steps out front with the crack running up the left side that he'd been meaning to fix since 2003. Ruth used to step over it without looking. 20 years of stepping over that crack, and she never once said, "Fix it, Eldon." She just stepped over it like it was part of the geography, part of the life they'd built there. He fixed it 6 months after she died. He hadn't been able to fix anything those first 6 months. Then morning, he woke up, and the crack was the first thing he saw from the end, and something in him couldn't stand it anymore. He went to the hardware store, came home, filled it in, 40 minutes of work. He stood on the porch afterward and didn't know what to do next. That was grief. You think it's the big things, her chair, her voice. And yes, those too. But grief also lives in the small things. A crack in a porch step you fill in 9 years too late. And then stand there, wondering why it doesn't feel like anything. Her roses were still out front, but pink ones along the left side of the porch, climbing the railing in summer. She'd planted them the year they moved in. He watered them every morning since she passed. Even in winter, he'd go out and check on them, stand in the cold, looking at bare stems and dead leaves, and think to himself, they'll come back in April. They always came back in April. He was 74 years old, moved slow in the mornings. His knees had opinions about the weather. His right eye was gone. His left still worked fine. He wore dark glasses outside, not because of light sensitivity, but because asked people too many questions when they saw the clouded eye, and he was just tired of the conversations those questions started. He told people glaucoma when they asked. Easier than the truth. The truth was complicated and old and his. Every morning at Seffen's, he walked 4 blocks to Cedar Park. Canvas bag over one shoulder. 2 pairs of gloves inside, a jump rope, hand wraps, whose elastic had made its peace with failure a long time ago. He set up under the oak tree near the basketball courts. The roots had pushed through the concrete over the decades, cracking it into a rough rectangle that, if you tilted your head at the right angle, looked something like a ring. He'd been coming here for just over a year. It started with 1 kid showing up. Then 2. Then 5. He never put up a sign or asked the parks department for anything or told anyone he was doing it. Just showed up every morning, set down the bag, and started moving. Kids notice things like that. A man who shows up and doesn't ask for anything in return. Theo Reeves was 10 years old, Small for his age, smaller than most of the other kids who drifted through Cedar Park on any given morning, which was already saying something. He wore the same gray hood most days. The cuffs were frayed. Not torn, just worn gradually the way things get worn when nobody's keeping track. He had a stutter, not a mild one, not the kind where people gently finish your sentences and everyone moves on. The kind that turned ordinary words into walls he had to stand in front of and wait. Sometimes the word came. Sometimes it didn't. When it didn't, his jaw would set and his eyes would go somewhere else, and he'd wait it out alone, the way a person learns to wait for things that have no schedule. His father had been in a federal correctional facility in Pennsylvania since Theo was 4 years old. His mother had stopped being a consistent presence around the same time, in different ways and for different reasons. Theo lived with his grandmother, Donna Reeves. Donna was 58 years old and worked the morning shift at Hartwell General Hospital. She left the house at 5:45 and got home at 4:15. In between, Theo needed somewhere safe to be. Cedar Park was what they could afford, which was to say, free. Donna had walked Theo there that first morning in early September, pointed at the bench near the basketball courts, told him she'd be back after 4. Theo had nodded. He was good at nodding. Nodding didn't require words. He saw the old man under the oak tree right away, the dark glasses, the deliberate movements, the way the man wrapped his hands before doing anything else, like the hands came first, and everything else was just what happened after. Theo watched from behind the water fountain. Day 1, 20 feet back. Day 2, 15. Day 3, 10. He didn't know why he kept getting closer. There was something in the way the man moved, no performance in it, no need for an audience. The whole world could watch or not watch, and either way the man would be exactly this, in exactly this way, at exactly this time. On the third morning, Eldon held out a pair of gloves without saying anything, just held them out toward the kid standing 10 feet away like he'd known all along he was there. Theo shook his head. "That's okay," Eldon said. He set the gloves on the bench beside him. "They'll be here tomorrow." Theo left, came back the next morning. The gloves were there. He walked up and put his hands out. Eldon wrapped them with the slow, careful tension of a man who understood that this moment mattered. Theo's hands were shaking, and he knew it, and he couldn't stop them, and he watched Eldon's face the entire time, waiting for the man to say something about it. Eldon just wrapped them, didn't look up, like shaking hands were the most ordinary thing he'd encountered all week. Then he said, "Plant your feet like this," and that was how it started. By the time September ended, Theo had learned the jab. Not just the motion, the mechanics underneath, the shoulder turn, the hip rotation, the way the lead foot had to stay grounded, or the whole thing fell apart at the base. Eldon was patient in a way Theo hadn't experienced from an adult before. No frustration building at the edges. No voice that got louder when the lesson didn't land. When Theo got something wrong, Eldon just showed him again. Same pace, same quiet. Like there was no particular urgency anywhere in the world, and they had all the time the morning could offer. Other kids came through the park during those weeks. A girl named Dija, who could move faster than anyone else had seen in years, but kept dropping her guard the moment she threw a punch. 2 brothers, Marcus and Lyle, who showed up enthusiastically for a week and then stopped. A heavy-set kid named Garrett, who hit the bag with enough force to make the chain rattle against the beam, but had never thought seriously about what his feet were doing. Eldon worked with all of them the same way. One thing at a time. Always start with the feet. Then the hands. Then what to do when something comes toward you that you didn't ask for. Theo was the one who kept coming back. Not entirely by choice at first. He simply had nowhere else to be. But somewhere around the 3rd week, something shifted. He started arriving early before the others. Started watching videos on his grandmother's phone about footwork and weight transfer late in the evenings. Started standing in the bathroom mirror with his fists up before bed, moving his head 2 inches left and 2 inches right, the way Eldon had shown him. Donna noticed. She came home one evening after a 10-hour shift, and stood in the hallway watching her grandson in the bathroom light. Chin down, guard up, moving with a focus she hadn't seen from him before. She didn't say anything, just stood there in the hallway in her coat and watched, and thought, something is happening here. On a Tuesday morning in late September, Bryce Holt walked into Cedar Park for the first time. Sky's got the color of old nickel, air that hadn't decided yet whether it was going to stay or go. Bryce came through the gate at 8:15 with 4 friends behind him. Two phones already out, a Bluetooth speaker at bass-heavy music at a volume that announced itself from the parking lot. Bryce was 22 years old and had the face of someone for whom things had consistently gone right, not because he'd worked for it, because they's always had. His father was Douglas Holt, alderman for the 3rd District, 3 consecutive terms, chair of the Public Safety Committee. Douglas Holt's name opened doors in this city the way a key opens a lock, automatically and without effort. It closed complaints. Police reports migrate quietly to the bottom of piles, and sometimes out of piles entirely. Bryce had grown up understanding that his last name was a kind of armor. He'd never had occasion to discover whether it had any limits. He had 200,000 followers on TikTok. His content was pranks, the kind that found people who had no real way to push back. Homeless men trying to sleep on park benches, elderly women at bus stops, a man in a wheelchair outside a grocery store. Bryce called it. His comment section agreed with him enthusiastically. His father had suggested once over dinner quietly that some of the content might be in poor taste. Bryce had smiled and changed the subject. The account kept growing. He spotted Eldon and Theo from across the park that first morning. An old black man in dark glasses. A small kid on cracked concrete with beat-up gloves. "Yo, oh," he said to the friend with the phone. "Get this." He walked over and kicked the canvas bag hard enough to send it sliding. The gloves spilled out across the concrete, the jump rope uncoiled. The hand wrap spread in a slow, undignified sprawl. "What is this?" Bryce said, looking around at his friends. "Homeless Jim?" His friends laughed. Eldon didn't look up. He put one hand on Theo's shoulder. "Pick up your gloves, son." "Hey," Bryce stepped directly between him. "I'm talking to you." Eldon looked at him then, his one working eye steady and unhurried, the look of a man who has encountered many versions of this particular thing and has not yet found any of them surprising. "We're just training," Eldon said. "Training." Bryce turned to the camera and grinned. "Training for what exactly? The retirement home Olympics?" His friends laughed again. Someone was already composing a caption. Theo's hands were shaking, not from cold. Eldon picked up the canvas bag, put the gloves back inside, took Theo's shoulder and steered him gently. "Come on," he said. "We'll be back tomorrow." They walked away. Bryce laughter followed them all the way to the sidewalk and kept going. He came back the next morning with a water bottle. Eldon was showing Theo how to pivot on the back foot. Shift the weight through the heel. Use the ground beneath you. Bryce walked up behind him without announcing himself and upended the entire bottle over Eldon's head. Cold water, down the back of the neck, through the collar, soaking into his shirt and dripping off his chin on concrete. Eldon stood completely still, his glasses fogged. One of the friends yelled something about baptism. Another one laughed so hard he bent at the waist. Bryce leaned toward the phone. "Still here, old man? I thought I told you to go home." Eldon wiped his face with his sleeve, took off his glasses, cleaned them on his shirt with 2 slow passes, put them back on. He looked at Theo. "Show me that pivot again." Theo was frozen, eyes wide, lips pressed together because the stutter was climbing and he was trying to keep it down. "It's okay," Eldon said. "Go ahead, show me." Theo pivoted. His feet were perfect, his hands were shaking. Bryce watched for another 10 minutes, then got bored but out and left. He posted the video that night, caption, "Old blind gets baptized in the park, 14,000 likes by morning, 300 comments. Most of them laughing. He came back Thursday, and this time he went for the bag. He reached in and pulled out the old gloves. Not just any gloves. These ones had been with Eldon since 1979. The leather, knuckle lock, cracked in the mid-'80s and been treated and cracked again. The laces were on their third replacement. Ruth had kept them on the mantel above the fireplace for years, cleaned them herself once a month with a soft cloth and a small amount of leather conditioner, as if they were something worth preserving for reasons that went beyond the obvious, which in her view they were. When Eldon finally moved them to the canvas bag, she hadn't said a word, just watched him fold them in and close the bag. Bryce held them up for the camera. "Look at these things, genuine museum pieces." He tossed one to a friend. The friend tossed it back. Someone else called for it, and it sailed over Eldon's head in a slow arc. "Give those back," Eldon said. His voice was even, but something had shifted in his jaw. "Or what?" Bryce held one glove over the trash can at the edge of the court. The quarter jangled it. "You want it back? Come and get it, old man." Eldon didn't move. Bryce dropped the glove in. Then the other one. "There. Now you match the rest of the garbage out here." Eldon said nothing. He turned to Theo. "Let's call it a day." That night at 10 o'clock, Eldon walked back to Cedar Park under the streetlights, found his gloves at the top of the trash can, carried them home, sat on the front porch and cleaned them with a damp cloth for an hour. Slow and thorough, the same way Ruth used to. His hands were steady. His breathing was not. Monday, Bryce brought spray paint. Eldon arrived at 7, as he always did. Theo was already there. Standing beside the bench instead of sitting on it, just standing next to it, looking at the seat with an expression that Eldon recognized from 3 months of mornings together. He walked closer and saw it, blind in thick white letters across the seat. "Go home," smaller underneath. Theo looked up at him, his mouth opened. The word took a moment to come through. "Mr. Eldon." "Who did?" This, Eldon set down his bag, looked at the bench for a moment, then sat on it, right on top of the paint like it was any other morning. "Come on," he said. "Let's work on your cross today." That was 4 weeks of it. Water, gloves in the trash, spray paint on the bench. Every night Eldon came home and said nothing to nobody. Ruth was 9 years gone. He didn't have people he talked to about things like this. His neighbor, Vera Briggs, 72 years old, lifelong resident of Oakfield Road, waved from her window every morning when he left for the park. Sometimes she brought food on Sundays. She saw things from that window of hers. She always had. She didn't say anything about what she was seeing. He didn't say anything either. The neighborhood watched the way neighborhoods watch. From windows, from cars idling at the curb a moment too long. From the slight turning of a head when you happened to be outside at the right moment. Nobody stopped it. The other parents started pulling their kids out. Deeja's mother came first. For the week after the baptism video reached 14,000 likes. She was careful when she talked to Eldon. Said had nothing against him personally. She meant it, but she couldn't have her daughter in that environment. The camera, the crowd that gathered, the particular kind of danger that accumulates around a man who refuses to move. The brothers Marcus and Lyle had already stopped showing up by then. Garrett's father said almost the same words as Deeja's mother. Close enough that you could hear how the conversation had traveled through the neighborhood in the days since the video. Within 10 days of the spray paint morning, it was just Theo. Because Donna had no other option. Her shift started at 45. The hospital didn't adjust for park incidents. Cedar Park was what they had. Eldon walked home one evening in the gray October cold and thought about what that meant. Every morning he made the choice to come back. And by making that choice, he was also making it for Theo, because Theo didn't have a choice. Theo was there because his grandmother needed somewhere safe, and the park was free and Eldon was already there. The last wasn't standing there by his own decision. He was there because Eldon was. That night, Eldon went to the garage, sat on the stool, wrapped his hands in the dark the way he'd done that first night 2 weeks ago. Stood up, faced the bag, hit it, left jab, right cross, slow, to see what was left. What was left was everything. The muscle cells held the knowledge better than his mind held anything these days. Roy Dempsey had put it there when Eldon was 19 years old, working with him in a basement gym in Philadelphia that smelled like canvas and old rubber, and the particular kind of effort doesn't come from wanting to win, but from being afraid of what happens if you don't work hard enough. Roy had been gone 15 years, but his voice was still in Eldon's hands, chin down, weight over the back foot. The power starts in tug round, not in the arm. Eldon hit the bag until his shoulders stopped cooperating, then sat on the concrete floor, back against the wall, hands open on his knees. He looked at the shelf across the garage, the shoebox. Ruth's blue scarf folded around whatever was inside it. He looked at it for a long time, then went back inside. He found the note on a night he hadn't been looking for anything. He'd been reaching for a small photo album Ruth had kept on the same shelf. His hand caught the edge of the shoebox and shifted it, and the scarf came loose, and something small and folded dropped to the concrete floor. He picked it up, carried it to the doorway where the light from the kitchen reached. Ruth's handwriting. He recognized it before he'd read a single word. The slight rightward lean to her letters, the way she formed her lowercase e, the small loop at the bottom of every G. Promise me, no more fighting. Ever. He stood in that doorway. Read it twice more. He knew she'd put it there deliberately. In the box, beside the scarf, beneath the belt, so that if he ever went looking in the middle of the night, the way a man sometimes goes to the thing he can't quite set down, he'd find this. He'd find her. He stood in the doorway a long time, then went inside and sat at the kitchen table, hands flat on the wood. Outside, the wind moved through Ruth's roses. He thought about Bryce. He thought about the spray paint on the bench. He thought about Theo's hands shaking that first morning and the way they'd gone still by the second week. He thought about Ruth in a hospital room 9 years ago, holding his hand, her face doing the thing it did when she was most afraid, which was to go very calm and very still. Promise me, he had promised. Every morning he went back to that park heap was him keeping it. Every time he stayed still while the water came down. Every time he packed the bag and walked away, he was keeping her word. Because her word was all he had left of her that wasn't a rose bush or a shoebox. He didn't sleep that night. 7 o'clock he got up, dressed, picked up the bag. 4 Cedar Park, the oak tree, the cracked and concrete, the wood strength paint still faintly visible in the cold morning light. Theo was already there, already waiting. Something in Eldon's chest shifted, not much. But enough. He set the bag down. Morning, he said. Theo nodded. They got to work. But Eldon knew. He knew the way you know weather before the clouds arrive. Not a thought, a pressure. Somewhere between the shoulder blades and the vasques of the skull. Bryce was building to something. The baptism video had pulled 14,000 likes. The gloves video, 30,000. The spray paint clip, 25,000 more. Each one bigger than the last because the formula was working. A target that didn't react. Matt, who stayed still while things happened to him. An audience that kept showing up because they wanted to see how far it would go. Sooner or later, someone who feeds on reaction pushes harder. Eldon had watched enough escalations in enough places to understand how this went. You don't stop a man like Bryce by staying still forever. Eventually, the stillness becomes the thing that invites more. Eventually, the patience gets read as permission. But something was coming. He just didn't know when. The night before October 9th was a Wednesday. He went to the garage one more time before everything changed. He wrapped his hands, stood in front of the bag. This time he didn't hit slowly, didn't pace himself the way a man does when he's just checking to see if something still works. He threw the combinations Roy had built into him 45 years ago, the real ones, the ones from the circuit, from the title run, from the nights when it was just him and Roy in that Philadelphia basement after everyone else had gone home, and Roy would say again, and Eldon would do it again and again, until it wasn't something he thought about doing, but something his body simply did. Jab, jab, cross, hook to the body, uppercut from the hip. The bag jumped hard on its chain. The beam above groaned. His left eye tracked everything clean. His feet moved the way feet move when 10,000 hours of work has made them capable of moving without instruction. His hips rotated before his arms did, because Roy had told him 500 times that the arm was just the last thing the power passed through on its way from the floor to the target, not the source of it. He stopped after an hour, sat on the concrete floor, back against the wall. He thought about the note. Promise me. He thought about Theo, showing up on this porch at 7 in the morning, with his hands wrapped wrong, fists up, 11 blocks of dark streets behind him, because he didn't want to stop. Roy used to say something at the start of every training session, before the raps came out, before they touched anything. The same thing every time without variation. A man's character, Roy would say, is not he does when it's easy. It's what he does when keeping his word starts costing him something real. Elton sat on the concrete floor and thought about cost, about what he'd promised, about whether there was a version of this where you could honor every promise you'd ever made and still be the man you were supposed to be. He didn't find a clean answer. He turned off the light, went to bed. Tomorrow was October 9th. He didn't know that yet, but somewhere in his chest, something was already did. October 9th came without ceremony. The gray sky, still air, wet leaves on cold concrete. The kind of morning that doesn't announce itself, just arrives and gets on with things. Eldon was at Cedar Park at 7. Theo was already there. They worked on combinations. Jab cross, pull back, then jab cross a hook, then again faster. Eldon stood 3 feet away with his palms up and Theo threw at them. Clean, that was always the point. You could be small. You could be 10 years old and the lightest kid in any room you walked into. You could have a stutter that locked you out of your own sentences 3 times a week. None of it decided anything. What decided things was whether you were clean. Theo's jab had changed. The hesitation before the snap was gone. The shoulder turned right. The pullback had speed behind it now. Eldon had watched it happen the way you watch something grow. You don't see it in the daily looking. Then one morning it's different than you think. When did that happen? Again, Eldon said. Jab, cross, pull back and clean again. Cleaner still. Eldon almost smiled, not quite, but almost. Bryce arrived at 8:15. 5 this time, not 4. The new addition had a ring light on a phone mount. The kind of setup that takes planning and implies a certain ambition about what's going to happen. Bryce had posted on TikTok the night before. 11,000 people were already on the live stream when they walked through the gate. Comments scrolling already. Who's the old man? What park is this? This is going to be something. Eldon saw them coming across the basketball courts. He put his hand on Theo's shoulder. Stay behind me. Just that. Bryce crossed the cracked concrete like he'd rented the space for the morning. Ring light for forward. Friends fanned out on either side, the full setup of a man who has prepared his audience. Well, well. His voice carried across the park. The blind museum is still open. He looked straight into the phone. You watching? Watch this! He reached down and grabbed the gloves off Theo's hands. Theo stumbled back 2 steps, catching himself on the edge of the concrete. Give those back, Eldon said. Shut up. Bryce tossed the gloves sideways without looking, then turned to Theo and bent at the waist to get level with a 10-year-old's face. The camera tilted to follow him down. You know what your problem is, kid. Theo said nothing. Jaw set, eyes on Bryce. Your daddy's in jail, you got nobody, and your boxing coach can't even see out of both eyes. He let that sit, looked at the phone, and grinned. You're nothing, same as him. The stutter climbed in Theo's throat, and he held it down, and kept his mouth closed, and his hands at his sides, and didn't say a word. Leave the boy alone, Eldon said, low, even. The kind of voice that carries a different meaning if you know what lives underneath it. But Bryce didn't know. He'd spent 4 weeks reading Eldon's stillness as the absence of anything dangerous. He'd watched the patience and understood it as emptiness. That was the last mistake he made. Or what? Bryce straightened, looked at the phone, grinned. 16,000 people watching. He shoved Theo both hands full force into a 10-year-old boy's chest. Theo flew backward, hit the raised edge of concrete where the tree roots had pushed highest, went down hard. His head hit the ground once. The blood appeared at his temple, thin at first. Then it moved, down past the eyebrow, into the eye. Theo didn't cry. He lay on the cracked concrete and looked up at Eldon, one eye open, one eye filling slow with red, and his hands were still curled, still closed into fists, still in the guard position he'd been taught to hold when things came at you that you hadn't asked for. The park went quiet. 16,000 people on the stream went quiet. Eldon looked at Theo, at the blood, at those small hands still curled on the ground. He thought about Ruth's note. Promise me, no more. He looked at Theo's hands. He took off his isinglass, folded them, set them on the bench. And he looked at Bryce. 3 punches. 5 seconds. Bryce threw first. A wide right hand with nothing underneath it. The swing of someone who has never had reason to expect anything to come back. All arm. No ground beneath it. Eldon slipped it 2 inches to the left. Bryce's fist hit nothing but air. His momentum pulled him forward and off balance. His eyes widened. Fear showed up in his face for the first time in the entire morning. The jab arrived before he could find his feet again. Down the center, the path clear. The sound it made was not a thud. It was sharp and specific. Bryce's head snapped back. His nose shifted left. His hands came up. Too late and too high. The cross went underneath, straight into the solar plexus. Every molecule of air left Bryce Holt's body in one compressed, involuntary sound. His mouth opened wide. Nothing followed it out. Then the uppercut. Eldon planted his back foot. His hips rotated before his arm moved, the way Roy Demps had drilled into him over hundreds of sessions until it wasn't a technique anymore, but a reflex. The fist traveled upward from the hip, not from the shoulder, because Roy had been right that the arm was just that last thing the power passed through on its way from the ground up through everything Eldon Webb had ever been. It connected under Bryce's chin with the precision of a man who had made that exact movement 10,000 times. Bryce left the ground, both feet, just for a fraction of a second. Then he hit the concrete face first and didn't move. 3 punches, 5 seconds. 46 years of keeping a promise broken in 5. The park was completely quiet. The ring light was still on. The phone was still recording. Bryce's friends hadn't moved. The one with the ring light stood exactly where he'd been standing, arm still raised. His face had gone a color it probably hadn't been before. Eldon stood over Bryce. His hands were shaking, not from the effort, from the release of something that had been dulhatis for 30 years, by a note in a shoebox and a promise made to a woman who was only there to see what keeping it had cost. He looked at his fists, opened them, closed them, opened them again. Then he turned around, walked to Theo, knelt on the concrete, pressed his palm against the cut at the boy's temple. Gently, the way you handle something that matters to you. You okay? Theo nodded. His eyes were wide but not afraid. Something else was in them. Something that didn't have a clean word. Mr. Eldon. No stutter. Just words clear and direct as anything he'd said in months. You can fight? Eldon lifted the boy, set him on the bench, pressed the old hand wrap against the cut, sat beside him, put his arm around those small shoulders. He didn't say anything. There was nothing that needed saying right now. The clip of the 3 punches was cut from the stream within the hour. By noon, it had 4 million views. By the following morning, 40 million. The comments came in fast and kept coming. Who is this man? That footwork, that's not a street fighter. Somebody needs to find out who he is. The hashtag went through 3 different versions over the course of Friday, before it settled into the one that stuck. Blind Champion. And across town, in a living room he'd occupied for 23 years, Woot Gilmorrow sat in his chair with his second cup of coffee and watched the clip for the 11th time. He paused it at the uppercut, zoomed in on the back foot, the angle. The way the hips began rotating before the arm moved at all. The path of the fist traveling from the hip, not from the shoulder. He knew that technique, had seen it once before in a specific way at a specific time. Springside, it's Atlantic City, sometime in the early 80s. Gil set down the cup, went downstairs to the basement where 41 years of boxing coverage lived in filing cabinets. He'd always told himself he'd digitize eventually, and never had. He found the folder in 20 minutes. Yellow, a little warped at the corners, handwritten label, Webb, the Eldon, the silence. 23 wins, 0 losses, 15 stoppages. Middleweight, final documented bout, March 1984. Oh, retirement announcement on record, just gone. Gil remembered the whispers. An underground bout somewhere. A serious injury nobody could confirm. The promoter had never been publicly named. Eldon ceased to exist in the sport, and the sport moved on without looking back. Gil looked at the clip again, paused on the right eye. Clouded, unfocused, still. He'd seen that specific kind of injury before, in fighters who'd taken a particular kind of blow in a particular kind of situation. He picked up the phone and called a contact at the State Boxing Commission. 3 days later, that contact called back. But first, Douglas Holt saw the clip on Saturday morning. His chief fafstas sent it with a sen. "This is your son." Douglas his what once, then again, closed his kitchen door, made 4 phone calls. The police chief, the district attorney's office, the media consultant who had run all 3 of his campaigns, his personal attorney. By Sunday evening, the architecture was in place. The 22 minutes of stream footage that preceded the 3 punches were submitted by Douglas's legal as procedurally unreliable. Timestamp irregularities, chain of custody problems. The clip released to media would be 90 seconds long, beginning at the moment Eldon removed his glasses. Everything before that was absent. The story was simple. A man with documented professional fighting training had attacked an unarmed 22-year-old in a public park, in daylight, with children present. Douglas held a press conference Monday afternoon. Bryce stood beside him at the podium, neck brace, arm in a sling, jaws wired shut. The camera found the image immediately, a father and his injured son. "My son was violently attacked in broad daylight. The professional training this individual possesses make this not simple assault, but aggravated assault under the law. We are asking the district attorney to pursue the maximum sentence available." He paused, looked down at his notes, looked back up with the kind of practiced steadiness that 3 terms in office provides. "We are a city of laws. That applies to everyone, without exception, regardless of age or circumstance." No reporter asked about the blood on a 10-year-old boy's forehead. Theo Reeves was not mentioned once. Eldon was arrested at 6 Monday morning. 2 officers knocked on his door. He was already canvas bag sat by the door, ready for the park. He opened the door. Recognized one of the officers from the neighborhood. Young couldn't have been past 30. The officer looked at the bag for a moment, then at the floor. "Webb, you're under arrest for the aggravated assault of Bryce Holt." Eldon set the bag down on the porch, took off his glasses, held out his wrists. Vera Briggs saw it from her window. A 74-year-old man in handcuffs in the early gray light. She picked up the phone, put it back down, picked it up again. Then called her daughter and cried for 20 seconds, while the daughter said things that helped and didn't help in equal measure. The cable news clip ran on a loop for 3 days. Elderly man viciously attacks youth in Cedar Park. They slowed the uppercut down to a quarter speed, zoomed in on Bryce's face hitting the concrete. Showed the hospital photo, swollen face, neck brace, tubes visible in the background. One anchor called Eldon a ticking time bomb hiding in plain sight in a public space. They did not show Theo. They did not mention the blood. They did not air the 22 minutes before. The comment sections began to turn. Not entirely, but enough. That old man could have killed someone. There's no excuse for that level of force against an unarmed person. What was he doing around children in the first place? People who'd been writing Blind Champion on Friday were sharing concern pieces about dangerous individuals by Monday afternoon. A petition appeared online. Remove dangerous individuals from Cedar Park. 800 signatures by Wednesday morning. Eldon was late on bail Tuesday. The court had assigned him a public defender. Her name was Bet Harmon, and the clerk at the bail hearing told him she'd come by his home that afternoon to go over the case. He walked back to Oakfield Road and waited on the porch. Bet arrived at 3:15. Late 30s, a lesser satchel worn soft with use. The look of someone who managed an impossible workload by moving through it steadily rather than stopping to be overwhelmed by it. She had 43 active cases. She'd read his file on the bus over. They sat at the kitchen table. She didn't soften anything. She could see from the way he sat, hands flat on the wood, back straight, that he'd prefer the unvarnished version. The DA is pushing for felony assault, she said. The argument is that your professional training constitutes a deadly weapon under the aggravated assault statute. That changed the charge significantly. Eldon was quiet for a moment. What about what Bryce did to Theo? The shove. The weeks before that. Bet looked at the table. Bryce's statement says he was attempting to de-escalate a confrontation when you attacked without warning. His legal team has filed the 90-second clip as the only verified footage of the incident. That's a lie, I know. But the full stream's been challenged on procedural grounds that will take time to undo. And Douglas Holt has been in this city for 3 terms. The judge assigned to your case attended his fundraiser dinner 11 weeks ago. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the wind moved through the rose canes. They want to make an example, she said, of me. Of what happens when someone steps outside the boundaries Douglas Holt has decided apply to everyone else in his city. She met his eyes. I'm not going to pretend the situation looks strong right now, but I want you to know I'm not walking away from this. He looked at her and understood that she meant it. Is there anything on our side? He asked. The full stream, if we can authenticate it. Theo's testimony. And the fact that the true story, if it gets told properly, is a catastrophic story for Douglas Holt. She paused. The problem is getting it told properly before they bury it. The restraining order arrived Wednesday, 500 feet from Eder Park, signed by Judge Kenneth Ray, whose name had appeared on the guest list of Douglas Holt's third-term fundraiser 11 weeks prior. That evening, someone threw a rock through Eldon's front window. No note, no face. Just a hole in the glass and shards across Ruth's rug. He swept them up, taped cardboard over the gap, sat on the couch in the dark for a long time. He couldn't go to the park. He couldn't see Theo. The canvas bag sat by the door, going nowhere. Donna called that night. Her voice had the thinness of something worn down from the inside. Mr. Webb, Theo won't eat properly. He just sits by the window and looks toward the park. A pause. He wrapped his own hands this morning, sat at the kitchen table with his fists up, just hitting the air, practicing by himself. Eldon closed his eyes. Tell him I'll be back, he said. When? He didn't answer. He didn't know. The next morning at 7, he got up and dressed out of habit, picked up the bag, walked to the front door, stopped, set the bag down, sat on the porch instead. Did the same thing the next morning, and the one after. On the 4th morning, he came out at 7 to find Theo sitting on the bottom step. 11 blocks, alone. Before the sun had fully committed to the day, his hands were wrapped, badly. The wrist tapes loose, the knuckles covered in bunch of folds, each finger barely separated from the next. The way a child wraps his own hands when he's working entirely from memory. And memory only gets you most of the way there. He looked up at Eldon. Mr. Eldon. Clear, no stutter. Like the words had been held in reserve for exactly this moment, and nothing was going to get in their way. I don't want to stop. Eld sat down on the step beside him. He took Theo's left hand, unwrapped it completely, started again from the beginning. Wrist first, firm and even. Across the knuckles, 3 full passes, not 2. Between each finger individually. Snug but not tight enough to cut circulation. He did the same with the right. We're not stopping, he said. They trained on the porch. No oak tree, no ring, no equipment beyond the gloves in the bag. Just an old man and a boy and the gray morning and the creak of the porch boards and the sound of Ruth's roses moving in the cold air. It was enough. It had always been enough now. Before Gil Morrow came to the door, before everything that followed, there was a Tuesday morning at a coffee shop 6 blocks from the Tribune. Gil had been going to this place for 11 years. Corner table, black coffee, the crossword until 9 when the breakfast crowd thinned. He knew the owner, knew which tables got the drafts in winter, knew which regulars sat where. 3 weeks ago, before any of this happened, he'd noticed a man at the table beside him. Late 60s. both hands wrapped around his coffee cup, a slight tremor that he managed by keeping his grip steady. Gil had watched him for a moment, the way you watch someone, and think, I know that thing, I've seen that kind of damage, and then gone back to the crossword. 2 days later, going through his initial research on the clip, Gil had found a partial name in the sealed complaint file's margin. A payment record, partially redacted. The letters W. Pruitt were visible at the start of what had been a longer entry. He'd written it down, then gotten pulled in another directions and forgotten to follow it. He remembered it now. On this particular Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after he'd first sat next to the man with the tremor. He looked at the corner table. It was empty. He went to the counter, described the man to the owner. Walt, the owner said, comes in every morning at 8, always that corner table, has for years. The Gil came back the next morning at 8:15, sat down. Walt Pruitt was 67 years old. The tremor in his hands came from specific kind of repeated head trauma, the kind that accumulated in bouts with no doctors present and no one counting how many times a fighter hit the canvas. He spoke at a measured pace, not because his thinking was slow, but because his brain had learned over years to be deliberate with language. He and following Eldon's case on the evening news. He'd watched the cable segment, the slowed-down uppercut, the hospital photo with the neck brace. He'd watched it, knowing what it wasn't showing and what had actually happened before those 90 seconds began. He hadn't called anyone. Not yet. I need to ask you, Gil said. He kept the folder closed for now. Were you ever involved in unlicensed boxing in this city? Walt looked at him. A long pause, the kind that has weight in it. Fulton Street, Walt said. 1983. 2 fights. Paid cash. Never saw the man who ran it. Signed something when I arrived. They said it was standard. I didn't read it. He turned his cup in his hands. The tremor was more visible when he wasn't gripping something. This sci-tech I took damage I never came back from. 3 weeks of double vision. Never fought again. The paper you signed, Gil said carefully. Is there any chance you still have it? Walt looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across his face. Come with me, he said. Walt's apartment was 6 blocks away. Clean, bare, 1 shelf of books, a small television. Under the bed, a plastic storage container. Inside it, a cardboard box with a folded newspaper from 1984 sitting on top. Beneath the newspaper, in a clear plastic bag, was a single sheet of paper. Contract of Performance and Liability Waiver, typed across the top in an old typewriter font. The contracting party, Clearview Sports Management, LLC. The company representative signature at the bottom, clear and complete. Douglas Holt. Dated October 19th, 1983. Below that, in different ink, the signatures of the performers. Walt Pruitt's name. 3 others. One of them was Eldon Webb. Walt looked at the document in Gil's hands. I kept it because throwing it away felt like saying it didn't happen, he said. Not because I thought I'd ever use it, just because it was the only proof I had that it was real. He paused. Then I saw him on the news, the old man in the park with wag laces. I watched what they were doing to him and I thought. Another pause. Somebody should say something. Gil looked at the document. This, he said, is everything. I know, Walt said. That's why it's still here, sir. 3 days after Gil's conversation with Walt Pruitt, the Tribune received a legal notice, a defamation lawsuit filed by Douglas Holt's personal attorney against Gil Morrow and the Tribune. The grounds were methodical. The story was built on an anonymous sealed complaint filed 40 years ago by an unidentified party. No independent verification existed. Gil Morrow was a retired journalist with a documented personal interest in boxing who had clear conflict of interest issues compromising the reporting. The Tribune's editor called Gil at 9 that evening. Gil called Eldon. They're moving to block the story, Gil said. His voice was steady, but there was an edge underneath it. If I can't independently verify the complaint source, the paper's legal team won't back publication. And the contract? The contract changes everything. It's a physical document with Douglas Holt's signature dated 1983, placing him as the operator of Clearview Sports Management, the same entity named in the sealed complaint. That's independent corroboration. That's what breaks this open. A pause on the line. They don't know about Walt yet? Eldon asked. No, they filed before I found him. Eldon thought about this. What do you need from me? He asked. Nothing more than you've already given, Jill said. I just needed you to know where things stood. The story is going to run. I know, Eldon said. How do you know? A long silence. Because Walt kept that paper for 40 years, Eldon said. A man doesn't keep something that long and then let it be for nothing. There was a phone call Bettate Harmon received on a Thursday afternoon. Unknown number. A man's voice, professional and careful, who said he was calling as a courtesy to let her know that her client's situation was going to become significantly complicated in days, and that she might want to consider whether continued representation served her career interests. Bet listened to the whole thing without interrupting. Then she said, "Is that all?" The man paused. "I'm simply suggesting that some cases are worth stepping back from." "Thank you for the suggestion," Bet said, and hung up. She called Eldon afterward. "Someone just told me to drop your case," she said. "What did you tell them?" "I told Thol thank you," and hung up. A pause. "I want you to know that." "I know," Eldon said. "I knew that already." She was quiet for a moment. "The story is running." "Oh, that's what Gil said." "Then we wait," Bet said, "and we stay standing." The story ran Friday morning. Front page of the Tribune's website. No slowed-down footage. No hospital photographs. Just the facts, set down in order by a man who had spent 41 years learning how to arrange facts so they couldn't be dismantled. The shell company, the warehouse on Fulton Street, the sealed complaint file from 1984, the signed contract with Douglas Holt's name on it, dated 1983, Walt Pruitt's account, Eldon's account, the medical records from 1984 documenting the specific nature of Eldon's retinal detachment. And then the present, the water, the gloves in the trash, the spray paint, that put a 10-year-old boy onto concrete with blood in his eye. The 90-second clip and what it had omitted, the press conference, the petition. 40 years of the same family, told completely, for the first time. Douglas Holt's chief of staff resigned by email at 5:47 in the morning, 12 minutes after the story went live. Douglas called his attorney. His attorney picked up this time. What he said was not encouraging. By Saturday, the story had reached 60 million views, 50% more than the clip of the 3 punches. Blind Line Champion came back. But it carried a different weight now. People understood what they were saying when they said it. The state attorney general's office issued a statement Saturday afternoon. A formal holding in Alderman Douglas Holt had been opened. All charges against Eldon Webb were under review, pending a complete evidentiary assessment. Bet called Eldon Sunday evening. "Have you been watching the news?" "I haven't had the television on since Monday. The charges are being dropped. The DA announced it this afternoon." Eldon was quiet, and the state AG has opened a full investigation into Douglas. The contract, the complaint file for Walt Pruitt's testimony, your medical records, everything. Still quiet. "The restraining order has been suspended as of this morning," Bette said. "You can go back to the park." A long pause. "Is it safe?" Eldon asked. Bet laughed. It surprised her. She hadn't laughed since before Monday. "Yes," she said, "it's safe." The investigation moved faster than anyone expected, which told you something about what had been sitting underneath all of it. When a case builds speed like that, it means the evidence was already organized and waiting. Nobody had looked because nobody had wanted to. Now they were looking. Now they had to. The state attorney general's office subpoenaed Douglas Holt's financial records on Monday morning, 4 days after Gil's story ran. By Wednesday, they had the bank statements. 13 cash withdrawals between 1982 and 1984, the amounts and dates lining up precisely with the documented schedule of underground boutsocks that the sealed complaint file described. The Clearview Sports Management LLC incorporation filings. The warehouse lease on Fulton Street, signed by Douglas at 29 years old under his own name because he hadn't yet learned to be careful. The liability waivers. Walt Pruitt's signed contract, 14 fighters total, no insurance, no medical coverage, no filings with the State Boxing Commission, positions at any event. 3 fighters whose careers ended as a direct result of injuries sustained in Douglas Holt's warehouse, while Douglas Holt kicked the door money and stayed behind his curtain. Eldon was one of the 3. Through the complaint file, investigators located the other 2. One had moved out of state 15 years earlier and was reached by phone. He agreed to speak. The other was Walt Pruitt, who had already given his full account to Gill and was prepared to give it again under oath, in any room they needed him to enter, with the contract in hand. On Thursday, Douglas Holt was formally charged, racketeering, operating an unlicensed professional sporting event without commission oversight, without medical supervision, without any of the protections the law required. Obstruction of justice for his documented interference with the 2 police complaints about Bryce that had been quietly moved to the bottom of piles and eventually out of piles entirely. His attorney issued a 2-sentence statement. Alderman Holt denies all charges and looks forward to his day in court. By Friday morning, the City Council had convened an emergency session. The vote was unanimous. Douglas Holt was removed from office. No press conference this time. No podium, no American flag pin, no prepared remarks about the rule of law. His attorney walks of City Hall through a serf's entrance. The officers who had once set aside plaintiffs at his request stood in the corridor and watched him pass without saying anything. Some things don't need a comment. Bryce Holt was charged separately the following week. Assault on a minor, criminal harassment, criminal mischief for the spray paint and the property damage. His TikTok account was suspended by the platform before the charges were even filed publicly. The 200,000 followers watched his last video come down without ceremony. The sex section in the final hours before the takedown was nothing but hashtags written thousands of times over by people who had started this whole story, laughing at a clip of a man getting water poured on his head. Blind champion. Justice for Eldon. Bryce's friends faced accessory charges. The one with the ring light deleted his account within an hour of the announcement. It didn't change anything. The footage had been everywhere for 2 weeks by then. You cannot retrieve something the world has already absorbed. It lives in screenshots and downloads and the memory of every person who watched it tight once and told someone else about it. Bryce eventually entered a no-contest plea to the assault and harassment charges. 200 hours of community service to be completed at the food bank 2 miles from Cedar Sea Park. A 3-year restraining order from the park itself. His TikTok never came back. His followers found other things to watch, other people to follow, other content that gave them whatever it was they'd been looking for. That's what the internet does with people it no longer needs. The U.S. Boxing Federation issued a formal statement on a Tuesday morning. Gill called to read it to Eldon. He was in the kitchen, standing at the window with his coffee, watching the November light come through the gap in the curtains and fall across the kitchen table in a long, pale strip. You ready? Gill said, "Go ahead." Gill read it. The Federation formally recognizes the professional record of Eldon the Silence Webb. 23 victories, 0 losses, 15 stoppages by knockout or technical knockout. Undisputed middleweight champion 1983. The Federation further acknowledges that Mr. Webb's career was ended through criminal means during an unlicensed event organized without commission oversight in March of 1984, and condemns that event as a criminal act that deprived American boxing of one of its finest competitors. The Federation extends its formal recognition to Mr. Webb's career and record, which stand without asterisk or qualification, and expresses its regret that this acknowledgement comes 40 years after it was deserved. Gill finished reading. A silence on the line. Eldon asked. Gill laughed. They spelled it right. Okay, Eldon said, another pause. That's all you've got? Gill asked. Eldon looked out the window at the bare rose canes. What else is there to say? The record was always the record. They didn't change it. They just wrote it down. Some people would want more than that. Some people weren't there for it, Eldon said. I was. Three former middleweight champions recorded video statements and posted them in the days that followed. Each one said the same thing in different ways. The name had floated around Jidzi tags as attached to whispers and half-remembered conversations and the particular kind of reverence that old trainers give to fighters they never got to see. They knew now. They understood now. They were sorry it had taken this long. One of them, Pete Callahan, who had held the middleweight belt from 1986 to 1989 and had defended it 5 times, said something that traveled further than the others. I heard about the silence my whole career. Older trainers would bring the name up and then go quiet, like they were remembering something they couldn't quite say out loud. I understand now what they were quiet about. They were quiet because he was robbed, and because they'd all seen it happen, and none of them had been able to stop it. And looking at the footage from Cedar Park, watching the way this man moved at 74 years old with one eye and 30 years of not fight, I believe with everything I know about this sport that he would have beaten me in my prime. I don't make statements like that. I'm making this one. The clip of Callahan saying those words had its own run. A different kind of run than blind champion, quieter and slower, the kind that travels through people who know what they're looking at. There was a Saturday morning between the charges being filed and everything being resolved when none of it was finished yet, and the world was still in motion. Eldon got up at 6:30, made his coffee the way he always made it, stood at the kitchen window and looked at Ruth's roses. The November cold had taken most of what was left of them. A few canes still show some color at the tips past their time, but still there. He stood there for a while. He thought about the last 4 weeks, about Theo on his porch steps with his hands wrapped wrong, about the cardboard taped over the broken window, which he still hadn't replaced with actual glass because there had been too many other things happening, and he kept forgetting. About Bet Harmon's voice on the phone when she said, "My son, I'm not walking away from this." About Glick Closil sitting at his kitchen table, sliding a document across the wood. About the name on that document. Douglas Holt. The man behind the curtain 40 years ago, finally with a face and a name and a set of charges that matched what he'd done. Eldon thought about whether he felt what he was supposed to feel. Relief, maybe. Satisfaction. The clean resolution of a long injustice finally corrected. What he actually felt was more complicated than any of those words. He felt tired. In the way you feel tired when you've been carrying something for a very long time and have finally been allowed to set it down. The doesn't realize the act of setting it down doesn't immediately remove the feeling of having carried it. The weight lingers in the muscles even after the thing itself is gone. You have to learn slowly that you're not holding it anymore. He felt something else too. Something he didn't have a word for. A stillness, maybe. The stillness that comes after the noise stops and you find out what's underneath it. Donna called at 7. "Have you been following the news? Bet updates me when something changes. Theo wants to write you a letter. He told me last night. He's been sitting at the table with a piece of paper for 3 days, and he can't figure out what to say." A pause. "He asked me what you write to someone who changed things." Eldon was quiet. "Tell him he doesn't need to write anything," he said. "Tell him to be at Cedar Park on Tuesday morning, 7 o'clock, under the oak tree." He heard Donna take breath. "He'll be there for 6, she said. "Then I'll be there at 6, too," Eldon said. Tuesday morning. He got up before his alarm, dressed slowly in the dark, canvas jacket. The new glasses, the ones that had arrived in a small box from a man in Detroit, a boxing fan who'd tracked down the address somehow, included a note on plain white paper in careful handwriting. "For the silence. We've been waiting for you to come back." He'd stood in the hallway, reading it 3 times the day it arrived, put the glasses on, looked at himself in the bathroom mirror for a moment, then picked up the canvas bag and walked out. The streets were quiet at this hour. November early, the sky not quite light. His breath showed in the cold. He walked the 4 blocks with his hands in his pockets and the bag over one shoulder, and he didn't hurry, and he didn't slow down. He walked through the gate of Cedar Park at 6:15. Theo was already there, sitting on the bench under the oak tree, which was bare now of every leaf, just the bones of it visible against the gray sky. Theo's hands were wrapped, his fists were up. He'd been sitting there in the cold, in the dark, waiting, and he didn't look like someone who had been waiting a long time. He looked like someone who had arrived exactly when he meant to arrive, and was entirely comfortable being here. The bench was clean. That was the first thing Eldon noticed. Someone had done the work of removing the spray paint and repainting the surface. The white was close to the original color, not quite, but close enough. He walked closer. The second thing he noticed was the plaque, small, brass, screwed into the back rail of the bench with 4 small screws. Easy to miss if you weren't looking for something there. He stopped and read it. This bench belongs to Eldon Webb and everyone he teaches. He stood there reading it twice. He didn't ask who had put it there. He didn't ask that morning or any morning after. He let it be a thing that had simple appear, the way some good things appear, without a bill attached and without a name on them. But Donovan had done it, her and Walt Pruitt. 2 people who had come to know each other through the same man, separately, and had ended up on the phone one evening talking about what they each wanted to do. They'd gone to Cedar Park at 5 in the morning with a cordless drill and a brass plate they'd had engraved at a shop downtown and a can of white paint. They'd worked in the dark and the cold for an hour and a half before anyone else arrived. Then they'd packed up and left. No note, no announcement, no need for either. That was the point. Eldon's sat down on the bench next to the plaque. Theo looked at him. The grin had been waiting for this moment for a while. Mr. Eldon. The stutter was there. The grin was bigger than the stutter. Eldon looked at the boy, at the frayed cuffs of the gray hoodie he'd been wearing since September, at the wrapped hands still raised in guard position even while sitting on a bench waiting for someone. "Show me your jab," he said. Theo stood up, planted his feet. Left forward, right back. Weight settled the way it was supposed to settle. He threw the jab, snapped forward, straight down the center, pulled back clean and fast. Again, snapped, straighter, again. The sound of it in the cold morning air, sharp and precise and nothing wasted. Eldon watched. Something settled in his face. The particular settling that happens when a face is exactly where it belongs and has stopped wondering whether it belongs there. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You've been practicing." Theo nodded. "I know," Eldon said. "It shows." The kids came back. Deja was first. Her mother brought her Wednesday morning and stood at the edge of the basketball courts watching for 20 minutes before leaving. She came back Thursday and watched again, this time in a coat with a hood that she pulled up against the cold. By Friday, she'd brought a folding chair and a thermos of something hot, and she sat there for the full hour without moving. 2 brothers came back from the far side of the park, twins named Jerome and Carl, who were 9 years old and had attended 4 sessions before everything happened, and had spent the intervening weeks, according to their mother, practicing combinations in their bedroom until she'd had to ask them to stop for the sake of the lamp on the dresser. A girl named May arrived on Thursday of the first week. She hadn't been part of the group before. She'd found it through the news coverage, seen the photos, asked her mother, walked to Cedar Park without telling anyone, and just stood at the edge of the courts until Eldon noticed her and held out a pair of gloves. She took them without hesitation. She had the kind of intensity that gonna come something remarkable or burns itself before it gets there. And Eldon had been around enough kids to know within about 4 minutes which direction it was going to go with May. He watched her hit the bag the first time, watched how quickly she registered what she'd done wrong, watched her adjust on the second try without being told. She was going to be fine. Garrett came back too, the heavy-set kid who hit with real power and had been slowly, over months, learning to let his feet be part of the process. He was different now than he'd been at the start. More potent, less in a hurry to throw the punch. He'd learned, or was learning, that the pause before the punch was where most of the work happened. By the end of the first week back, 12 kids were showing up every morning. By the end of the second week, 15, parents started bringing chairs. Someone appeared on a Thursday morning with a folding table and a cooler of water bottles and set it up at the edge of the courts without saying anything to anyone. Just set it up and went and stood with the other parents. Someone else left a container of orange slices the following Monday. Nobody organized any of this. Nobody sent a message or made a plan. The park just began to become something. The way things become what they're supposed to become when enough people decide quietly and separately that they want it to be that way. Eldon taught them all the way he'd always taught. Feet first, every time. Feet first. Then hands. Then what to do when the world sends something toward you that you didn't ask for and didn't deserve and has to be dealt with anyway. Vera Briggs came to the door on a Sunday afternoon in November. She had a casserole dish covered in aluminum foil. She stood on the porch, and she looked at him without looking away, which was, he knew, not easy for her, because Vera Briggs had spent the last month living with something she hadn't done and knowing she hadn't done it. "I want to say something," she said. "Okay, I watched it every morning from my window. Everything that happened in that park. I saw the water. I saw the gloves go in the trash. I saw the spray paint. I watched that boy of Douglas Holt's come in there every morning, and I picked up the phone twice, and I put it down both times because I told myself what was the point." She stopped. "That's not who I thought I was, and I want you to know I know that." Eldon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How many times did you stop and ask how I was doing before all of this?" She thought. "Every Sunday when I brought food, and sometimes in the week. And after Ruth died?" Her expression shifted. I was here a lot." "You were," he said. "Every person has the thing they can do and the thing they can't. You couldn't do the phone call. But you were here every Sunday for 9 years." He took the casserole dish from her. "You're here now. That counts." Her eyes filled up. He held the door open. She came inside. They sat at the kitchen table and talked about Ruth for a long time. An hour and a half, maybe more. About the rose eisel, how Ruth had chosen the specific variety. For some reason Vera couldn't remember now, but Ruth had explained very specifically at the time. About the Christmas baking that arrived at Vera's door without fail every December, whether Vera had mentioned wanting anything or not. About Ruth's laugh, the one that went through walls and made you smile before you even knew what was funny. About the way she stepped over that crack in the porch for 20 years without ever once mentioning it. Because she understood, Vera said, that mentioning it would made Dan feel bad about something that wasn't worth feeling bad about. And Ruth didn't waste time making people feel bad about small things. Eldon listened to this, let himself listen to it. He hadn't talked about Ruth like this in a while. There weren't many people left who had known her in the way Vera had known her, as a neighbor and a friend and a woman who was herself rather than just being his wife. When Vera finally left, walking down the porch steps in the cold, late afternoon, he stood and watched her until she turned the corner. Then he looked at the rose canes, bare for the season now, just the structure of them visible, the shape that would be filled in again by April. He went back inside. Put the casserole in the refrigerator, stood in the kitchen in the quiet. He thought about Ruth, thought about her for a good while, then put the kettle on. Douglas Holt's trial was scheduled for March of the following year. In the months between the charges and the trial date, his name appeared in the local paper, only in relation to the case. The 3 terms on the city council, the committee chairmanships, the fundraiser dinners, the name on buildings and programs. All of it had been compressed into a single story about a warehouse on Fulton Street, and a voice behind a curtain, and 14 men who signed pieces of paper and got hurt and had nowhere to take it. His attorney was working through pretrial motions. One of them argued that the passage of 40 years made a fair trial impossible. Another argued that the sealed complaint, having been filed anonymously, lacked the foundation for admissibility. Both motions were denied. The third motion, the one about whether Walt Pruitt's signed contract constituted sufficient independent corroboration, took longer. The judge sat on it for 3 weeks before denying it. Douglas Holt's day in court was coming, and his armor was not what it used to be. Gil came by twice more before the end of the year. The first time was a Thursday afternoon in November. He called ahead, and Eldon said come by at 3, and they sat on the porch despite the cold because Eldon said he'd been inside too much lately and needed the air. They talked for an hour and a half. Not about the case, not about Douglas or the charges or any of the procedural machinery grinding forward toward March. They talked about boxing, the middleweight division in the early 80s, which Gil had covered from ringside and Eldon had lived from inside the ropes. And they had enough overlapping knowledge that the conversation moved in the way Toyota conversations move when both people actually know something about what they're discussing. They talked about Roy Dempsey. Gil had met him once. A press event in 1982, one of those industry dinners where everyone wore a suit that was slightly too tight and talked loudly over the food. Roy had been in a corner talking quietly to a young fighter who's clearly nervous about something. And Gil had noticed them because Roy was giving all of his attention to the kid and none of it to the room, which was unusual for that kind of evening. That sounds like him, Eldon said. What was he like to train under? Eldon thought about this for a moment, looking out at the street. Honest, he said, that was the thing. He never told you what you wanted to hear. He told you what you needed to know. And there's a difference, and most people can't find the line between those two things. But Roy always knew exactly where it was. He paused. He also never asked you to do anything he wasn't willing to do himself. He was 60 years old when I started with him, and he could still move better than kids half his age. Not hit as hard. But move. You miss him. Every day, Eldon said. But you miss people differently as you get older. It gets quieter. It doesn't hurt less. Exactly. It just takes up a different kind of space. Gil didn't write any of this down. He just sat there in the cold with his hands around his coffee cup and listened. That was the whole visit. An hour and a half on the porch in November, talking about boxing and Roy Dempsey, and how missing people changes shape over time. It was a good visit. Gil came back a second time with a photographer. He said he wanted to write one final piece. Not about the investigation, not about Douglas or the charges or the legal architecture of consequence, just about Cedar Park, about what was happening there. Eldon agreed. He agreed mostly because Theo would be in it, and because Theo deserved to exist in a story that told the truth about who he was and what had been happening in that park for the past year. The photographer was a quiet woman in her 40s who worked efficiently and without a lot of direction. She moved around the park for an hour, finding angles, waiting for the right moments. She didn't pose anyone or ask people to do things. She just watched and waited and clicked the shutter when something was true. The image that ran with Gil's final piece became the most widely shared photograph the Tribune had published in over a decade. Eldon kneeling on the cracked concrete. Theo's hands in his left eye looking down at the tape with the full, unhurried attention toward a man who understands and that this particular moment is worth doing right. His right eye, clouded and still, aimed at the camera without apology and without explanation, simply there, simply part of him, simply a fact about who he was and what had happened to him and what he'd done with both. Behind them, 15 kids standing in a line with their hands up, all of them in guard position, all of them protecting what mattered. 3 words for the headline. The ghost returns. Do you feel vindicated? Gil asked. They were sitting on the bench together, the brass plaque at Eldon's back, pale December light coming through branches that had given everything up for the season. Cold but dry, the kind of cold that doesn't apologize for itself. Eldon took his time. He had learned over the course of a long life that some questions were facile answers. This was one of them. It deserved to be held for a moment before he opened his mouth. I feel tired, he said finally. The good kind. The kind that comes after you've actually done something rather than just survived something. Those feel different. Most people, they're the same thing, but they're not. And the anger. Gil asked. About 1984. About Douglas. Eldon was quiet for a moment. The anger was there for years, he said. Long years. But I didn't have anywhere to put it, because I didn't know who was behind that night. I knew there was someone. I knew the voice, and I knew the curtain, and I knew what had happened to my eye and my career, but I didn't have a name or a face or anything I could hold on to. He looked out at the pavilion, at the kids moving through combinations in the winter light. After a while, when the anger doesn't have anywhere to go, it has to become something else, or it just eats you. So it became a decision. What kind of decision? About what kind of man I was going to be. Given what had happened. Given what I'd lost. Roy always said that character wasn't what you showed when things were going your way. Anybody looks fine when things are going their way. Character is what you show when keeping your word starts costing you something real. He looked at the plaque behind him. I made a promise to Ruth, he said, and keeping that promise cost me something real. It cost me 30 years of distance from this. He gestured toward the park, the bag, the kids, all of it. But it also gave me 30 years of something else. Of being the man she needed me to be. Of being someone she could count on. He was quiet for a moment. I don't know if I made the right call. I don't know if I'll ever know that cleanly. What I know is that I made a call and I kept it. And then the day came when keeping it meant leaving a child unprotected. And I couldn't do that. He looked at the concrete. Maybe that's not a contradiction. Maybe that's just how promises work. They're not forever. They're until something more important speaks you to let them go. Gil wrote that down. Then he put the notebook in his pocket. One more question, he said. Off the record. Go ahead. Do you think she'd understand? Gil said. Ruth, about that morning, about the 3 punches. Eldon was still for a long time. Out in the park, Theo was working him with A, and she was giving him a harder time than he expected, and he was adjusting, working the angles, finding new solutions. She put that note in the box, Eldon said. Promise me. No more fighting. He paused, but she also raised me to protect what mattered. She didn't use those words, but that was what she was doing every day for the 32 years we had. She was showing me what protecting things actually looked like. He looked at his hands. I think she'd understand. I think she'd have understood before she even finished watching the clip. Another pause. I think that's why she wrote the note the way she wrote it. No more fighting. Not no more protecting. She knew the difference. He turned and looked at the plaque. At her name on the program board at the entrance to the pavilion. Ruth Webb Boxing Program. She always knew the difference, he said. The city council passed the funding resolution in November. Cedar Park would receive municipal allocation for the Ruth Webb Boxing Program, beginning with the new equipment. A covered training pavilion adjacent to the oak tree, the one with the roots that had cracked the concrete into the shape of a ring. 2 licensed coaches on salary, benefits included. Free attendance for all children 16 and under. No registrations required. No forms, no waiting lists, no proof of address, no barriers of any kind. The Parks Department called Eldon to ask about the naming. He didn't need to think. The Web Boxing Program, he said, after my wife. She's the reason I kept my hands down for 30 years. And the reasons I put them back up. The woman on the line was quiet for a moment. That's a beautiful name, she said. Yes, Eldon said. It is. The pavilion went up in early December. Heavy bags on a proper steel frame, 4 of them. Speed bags on adjustable height mounts. Jump ropes hanging in a row from hooks along the back beam. A proper mat surface covering half the cracked concrete, padded and secured at the edges. Water stations at either end with paper cups in a dispenser. A first aid kit mounted on the post nearest the oak tree. 2 licensed coaches arrested on the same day, separately, having both read Gil's story and made the same decision without knowing the other had made it. They drove to Cedar Park, and both ended up standing under the oak tree at approximately the same time, each waiting to speak to the old man with the glasses. Their names were Dennis Varga and Corinne Shaw. Dennis had won 2 Golden Gloves titles in the light heavyweight division in his 20s and had been boxing for 8 years. Corinne had competed as a featherweight for 6 years before transitioning to coaching and now worked primarily with kids under 12. They had never met before. They both appeared under the oak tree at Cedar Park on the same Thursday afternoon. They met each other there, started talking, discovered they had 3 coaches in common from their respective careers, decided to get coffee and figure out if working together made sense. Eldon wasn't listed as a coach in any official capacity. No certification, no paperwork, no designation. He hadn't sought any of those things and wasn't going to start. But every morning he arrived before Dennis and Corinne. And every morning when they got there, they stepped back and let him work with whoever needed working with. They watched and learned things from watching him that no certification program had ever taught them. And nobody discussed the arrangement because there was nothing to discuss. Some things are self-evident. The Amateur Youth Exhibition was held on the 2nd Saturday of December at the Hartwell Community Center. 8 kids from the program. Round-robin format. 3 2-minute rounds per bout. Exhibition only, no official record kept. Theo Reeves was the 2nd bout of the morning. He was 10 years old and 62 pounds at weigh-in, which put him in the lower bracket. His opponent was a boy from a program across town, 11 years old, 68 pounds, with 3-inch and he's a southpaw stance that would require adjustments Eldon and Theo had spent 2 evenings specifically working on. Theo knew this going in. They'd talked through it. He understood what the southpaw stance meant for the angles. He understood what this reach disadvantage meant for his entry. He had a plan. He was still scared. In the locker room, 20 minutes before the bout, the plan and the fear were both very present and not quite making peace with each other. Theo sat on the bench with his hands in his lap, and his hands were shaking, and he was looking at them like he was trying to decide what to do about that. Eldon came in and sat down beside him. He didn't say anything right away. He let the room be quiet for a moment. Let Theo feel whatever he was feeling without rushing toward or away from it. Theo looked at his hands, then looked at Eldon. "I'm scared," he said. Just like that. Clear, no stutter, the way the most honest sometimes come out. "Good," Eldon said. Theo looked at him. "That's not what people usually say." "Eh?" "No," Eldon agreed. "It's not." He picked up the hand wrap. "But here's the thing about scared. Scared means you care about what happens. Scared means this matters enough to you that your body is paying attention. You know what it means when your body stops paying attention before a fight? What? It means you've stopped caring. And when you stop caring, you stop working. You stop working, you lose things you didn't have to lose." He started on the left hand. Across the wrist, 1 firm pass, then another. Scared is information. It's your body telling you this is real. Listen to it, but don't let it drive. Theo watched the wrap going across his knuckles. "What if I lose?" he asked. Question, the one he'd asked before. "Then you lose," Eldon said, the same as he'd said before. "And on Monday you come back and we look at exactly what went wrong and we fix it. That's the whole practice." He worked between each finger, pulling each one snug. There is no version of this where losing is the end. The only end is deciding not to come back. He finished the left hand, reached for the right. "When Roy Dempsey trained me," he said, "he used to say one thing before every session, before we touched anything, before the wraps even came out. He started on the right wrist. He'd say, 'You already did the hard part. You showed up. Everything that happens from here is just what showing up looks like in practice.'" He worked across the knuckles of the right hand. 3 passes, even and firm. "You showed up today," Eldon said. That's already done. That's already in the record." Between the fingers, pulling each one careful and snug. "Feet," Eldon said when he was done. Theo planted them, left forward, right back. "Hands. Up." Eldon looked at him, oversized headgear sitting a half-inch to the left, borrowed chest protector, slightly too wide in the shoulders, the gray hoodie underneath with the frayed cuffs. The same kid who had stood behind the water fountain for 2 weeks, watching an old man wrap his hands, before he could work up the nerve to walk closer. "Ready?" Eldon asked. 1 breath. "Yes, sir." He lost the first round. Not badly, not in a way that looked like defeat. But clearly, to anyone watching who knew what they were seeing, he was reaching with his arms, trying to close the distance on the taller, longer paw by extending forward, and the other kid had good instincts and timed the reach of his well, countering twice with enough clean contact to take the round. Theo's feet came apart 3 times in that round. His hands dropped after the jab. He was fighting from the outside when he needed to be on the inside, and the gap in reach meant the outside was exactly where he didn't want to be. In the corner between rounds, Eldon was completely calm. He took the mouthpiece out, gave Theo water, and let him breathe for 10 full seconds, because the breathing mattered, and the 10 seconds felt long but weren't. "Where did your feet go in that round?" he said. Theo was still breathing. "They came apart," he said. "Why?" A pause. Theo thought about it honestly. "Because I was trying to close distance with my arms, and my feet weren't involved." "Right. And when your feet stop being involved, what happens? I lose the base. And when you lose the base, everything else goes wrong." "Everything else goes wrong," Eldon said. "Now, he's 3 inches longer than you. He has reach. That means the outside is where he wants you. You already know this." He held the mouthpiece up. "So where do you need to be?" "Inside." "How do you get inside?" "On an angle, not straight in." "Come in on an angle after he commits." "He commits with that long right hand when he thinks you're reaching," Eldon said. "You've seen it twice now. You know it's coming. What do you do with something you know is coming?" Theo's face changed slightly. It's not a smile. Something more focused than a smile. "You wait for it," he said. "You wait for it," Eldon said. "Then you move. Feet first, always feet first." He put the mouthpiece back. "Go." The second exit round looked different from the first. Theo was lower, more patient. He stopped reaching with his arms and started moving with his feet, and the difference was visible from the folding chairs where the parents sat. The other kid was calibrated for the reaching version of Theo and kept finding slightly less contact than he expected, and that small confusion accumulated across the round. 43 seconds in, the other kid threw the long right hand, the one Theo had seen twice in the first round. Theo waited for it, slipped it to the outside, dropped his level, and threw the cross. Straight down the center, nothing else. No setup, no combination, no flourish. Just the cross, thrown clean and straight and from a proper base, everything behind it. The other kid's legs bent. He didn't go down, but he grabbed immediately and wrapped both arms around Theo to hold on, and the referee stepped in to separate them and looked at the other kid's eyes and gave him a standing count. Theo stepped back, waited, hands up. The other kid indicated he was fine, and he was fine, technically, but the round had turned. Theo won the second round clearly. The third round was even, both kids tired, neither making a decisive statement. The decision came down to the first 2 rounds. Theo won on points. The room held maybe 60 people. A gymnasium that smelled of floor wax and old rubber. Folding chairs in 3 rows on each side. Not a large crowd, not a loud one. But Donna Reeves made up for the size of the room. She was on her feet before the last word of the announcement, both arms up, shouting something that was probably Theo's name, but had become pure sound by the time it left her. The referee actually looked over, which almost never happens. Donna had worked 2 double shifts that week. She had driven to the community center directly from the hospital in her scrubs because she hadn't had time to go home and change. She stood there in her hospital scrubs with both arms in the air and made enough noise for 60 people and didn't care even a little about any of it. Theo looked across the ring, found Eldon. Eldon looked at him, nodded once. Theo nodded back. That was all. That was the whole conversation. 2 nods across a small gymnasium between a 74-year-old man and a 10-year-old kid, and it contained everything that needed to be said between them. Afterward, the room emptied at the pace of people who aren't in a hurry. Jackets located, children retrieved, brief conversations in the doorway that lingered because nobody wanted to be the one to end them. Theo found Eldon near the door. He came up to him and stopped and looked up at him. He had taken the headgear off. His hair was damp with sweat. There was a small mark on his right cheekbone that would probably be a bruise by tomorrow. He didn't say anything for a moment then. "Thank you." No stutter. Just the 2 words, plainly. Eldon looked at him. "You did the work," he said. "You showed up." Every morning for 3 months, I just stood there. You didn't just stand there. I held my hands up and let you hit them, Eldon said. You did the rest. Theo looked like he wanted to argue this point. He also looked like he was too tired from 2 rounds of boxing to mount a serious argument right now. Monday, Eldon said. 7 o'clock. I'll be there at 6:30. I'll be there at 6:15. Theo smiled, then went to find his grandmother, who was still recovering from her own performance on the other side of the room. Eldon walked home alone. 4 blocks, same 4 blocks. December now, the cold settled in properly, no longer pretending to negotiate. His breath showed in the air. His hands were in his pockets, and the canvas bag was over one shoulder, and he walked at his usual pace, which had never been fast and had gotten somewhat slower over the years, but was still reliable. He passed Cedar Park on the way. He didn't stop, just walked alongside the fence and looked through the chain link at the pavilion, the bags hanging still in the dark, the sat surface pale under the single security light that the Parks Department had installed along with everything else. The oak tree above all of it bare now, its structure visible against the night sky in a way it wouldn't be once April came and the leaves returned. Good bones, that tree. 50 years of pushing up through the concrete, and it was still there, still growing, still finding ways to take up the space it needed. The ring-shaped crack it had made in the concrete over those decades was right there under the pavilion now, and the matte surface covered most of it, but the crack was still there, underneath. Some things don't disappear. They just get covered over. He kept walking. Oakfield Road, his house. The porch with the 3 steps and the filled-in crack on the Clactasa died that he'd fixed 6 months after Ruth died. He stopped. The roses were there. He'd expected them to be completely gone by now. The temperature had been in the 30s most nights for 3 weeks. He checked them yesterday, and they looked finished, the last of the late-season blooms, spent and brown. But there were 3 of them tonight. Small. Later than they had any business being. The pink slightly muted by the cold, the petals a little weathered at the edges, but open. Still open in December, on a street in a city where December did not leave room for roses. He stood in front of them for a long time. He thought about Ruth. He had 32 years together in this house. About the morning she planted those roses in the first summer they lived here, on a Saturday in June, kneeling in the dirt while he held the bag of soil and handed things to her when she asked for them. About the way she'd stood up afterward and looked at the bare stems and said, "They won't look like anything for a while yet." And he'd said, "How long?" And she'd said, "Long enough that you'll have forgotten to be impatient about it." She'd been right. He had forgotten to be impatient. And then they bloomed. He thought about on the note in the shoebox. "Promise me, no more fighting, ever." He thought about what it had cost to keep that promise, and what it had cost to break it, and whether the cost was the right one to pay, and whether you ever got a clean answer to that question. He didn't think you did. He thought you got a life, a series of decisions, each one made with what you knew at the time, each one carrying its own consequences forward into days and years you hadn't seen yet. You didn't get to know in advance. You just made the call and kept walking and found out later what it meant. He had kept promise for 30 years because Ruth had asked him to, and because he loved her, and because the alternative was a version of himself he didn't want to be. He had broken it on a Wednesday morning in October because a 10-year-old boy was bleeding on concrete, and the calculus had changed in a way that Ruth, he believed, would have understood before he'd finished explaining it. He had come back here afterward, to the park, to this bench, to these mornings, because this was where he was supposed to be. This was what he was supposed to do with what Roy had given him and what Ruth had helped him preserve. Teach, show up, keep doing it. He touched one of the petals. The cold had stiffened the outer edge of it, but the center was still soft, still giving, still, against all seasonal expectation, a rose. He thought, there you are. He stood there until the cold had fully arrived in his hands. Then he walked up the steps, past the filled-in crack, unlocked the door. The canvas bag went by the door where it always went. He turned off the kitchen light, went to bed. Monday was coming. 7 o'clock. The oak tree, the cracked concrete. He'd be there at 6:15. He always was. The Ruth Webb boxing program is still running, free to attend. No forms, no waiting lists, no barriers of any kind. It starts at 7 in the morning at Cedar Park, under the oak tree, on the concrete where the roots have been pushing through the ground for half a century or more. Every April, the roses on Oakfield Road come back. They always come back. The man who tends them shows up, sir, every morning before anyone else, and waits under the oak tree with his canvas bag at his feet. He has always done this. He will keep doing it for as long as his feet hold out. And after that, if the program lasts, which it will, the 15 kids and all the kids who come after them will show up 7 o'clock and work on their feet first, then their hands, then what to do when the world sends something at them they didn't ask for, because that's what they were taught. And that's what they'll teach.